Awesome. So, thank you so much, this group, to inviting me. It's the first time I've talked here, but I've known Richard and Lynn for decades. I'm one of the ophthalmologists, kind of back of the eye retina specialists at the university. And so a lot of you have heard of some of the eye findings from C3G. Drusen may be a word that you've heard before. So we're going to talk a little bit about C3G in the eyes. I have no disclosures, but these are the learning objectives. We're going to learn a little bit about the anatomy of the eye because you're all experts on the kidney, but we're also going to talk a little bit about drusen, what they are and why they form. We're going to talk a little bit about the vision changes that you really should be watching for if you have C3G, and then what can you really do for these. So take even one further step back is a lot of people, we talk about vision. Everyone knows 20/20 vision's good vision. But what does that mean? Well, that really means you see it 20 feet away from the eye chart. You see little black letters on a white background. What somebody with normal vision should see at 20 feet away. 20/40 vision is worse than that. When the bottom number drops, that means that you're now seeing 20 feet away from the eye chart what somebody can walk back to 40 feet away from the eye chart with normal vision and see. So 2400 is even worse, and that's that big E that's on the top of the chart, for what you see. Center vision isn't everything. Peripheral vision is important. There's color vision, there's motion, there's all sorts of other aspects of vision that we may not get into here for this, but let's look a little bit at the anatomy. I usually tell people as a start that the eye is basically like a camera in the way it works. Light comes into the front of the eye, it goes to a lens, it focuses it across this jelly-like clear vitreous, and it focuses it on the retina, which is in the back of the eye, which is thin like the film of a camera, and the picture is formed there, and then information goes down the optic nerve. Now, if we look at the back of the eye at the retina, this is a wide field picture of most of your retina. You can see here's the optic nerve, here are the blood vessels branching out like veins on a leaf. And this is where you would have your vision. There's an area called the macula, and that's the center part, about this big, and that's where you have your center vision. If you put your thumb up, close one eye, put your thumb up about 4 inches in front of your face, your thumb's blocking the area that would be the macula. That's the most important area for your vision. There's an area in the middle of the macula called the fovea, and that's where you've got that super good vision and you can get your 20/20 vision. But the macula can give you some vision that's pretty good around the side. You can still see some big things, 2200 and 2400 outside the center. But the vision is a lot like a bullseye here. It's not like the film of a camera in that respect, where the film of the camera has equal resolution all across the film. But the eye is very specialized, and that bullseye area in the middle is the important area. And so you hear people talk about the macula for things. And the macula is just an area of the retina. It's the center area. But if you have things out in the periphery, you can hold your hand up here and you can count fingers, but you really couldn't hold like a book over here and read it while you're looking straight forward. So if you damage that macula, if you damage the very center of the macula, you made a 1 millimeter or 1/25th of an inch hole in there, you shot a laser in here, you had bleeding or something, you would drop your vision to 2200 to 2400, which is legal blindness if you did it in both eyes. So that center is super, super important, and we do things to protect it. Now, here's the whole retina. I'm going to be showing you some pictures of just the macula. So this is just the center part of the eye, and again, that fovea that's there in the center. So we can look at the retina straight on like this, like the film of a camera, but you can also look at the retina on the side. And over the last 20 years, we've developed instruments that have that ability. This is an optical coherence tomogram. It's a real easy test to do. You sit in front of it and see some lines paint, but you get a picture like this that's relatively confusing. But this is a cross-section of the retina. So looking at the retina on the side, and from here to here is about where the macula is. There's a little depression in the center, and that's where that fovea is, the most important area of your vision. And the retina kind of goes from here to here, and these are layers that are underneath the retina. And the white of the eye is back here. There's a layer in here called the choroid that gives blood and blood supply to this part of the retina, this part of the retina that's farthest away from where light comes in. And this is where the photoreceptors are. Now, the retina is kind of built backwards if you thought of it from what a lot of things are. Like we have skin, and our dead skin cells shed on the way out. Well, your photoreceptors are shedding every day, and they're getting gobbled up by the tissues underneath. And so they don't shed out, they shed inward, and they have to be digested and processed. And there's really efficient processes to do this. But sometimes that material kind of builds up under the retina. That wear and tear pigment doesn't get digested properly, and these cells kind of get constipated, and they throw out this undigestible stuff. And that's what drusen are. These yellow spots that are now under the retina, different from what we saw before, are basically like bumps under a sheet. And they're made up of this wear and tear pigment called lipofuscin. And this membrane underneath the retina where they develop is very, very similar to the membranes in the kidney where C3 deposits, which is interesting. Richard Smith was really involved in a lot of realizing that C3 was important in this, and the complement factor H played a role in some people in developing drusen. And drusen really, if you talk to ophthalmologists, they know all about it because it's a really common condition that we see to have drusen build up in a condition called age-related macular degeneration. There's lots of people with that. There's very few people with C3G disease. So we found out that complement is in normal drusen that we see in macular degeneration. We also see it in complement in people who have C3G disease. There's a lot of complement in these drusen, and drusen will form not only in macular degeneration, but in most people over time with C3G. So again, let's backstep a little to the common condition that we have, age-related macular degeneration. This is a bunch of drusen in somebody's macula. There's big drusen, there's little drusen, there's drusen that are kind of confluent, they're spread out. But we find macular degeneration in almost 20 million people in the United States. So lots and lots of people have it. But of the people who have vision loss from this, it's much less. So we're really looking at maybe only 1.5 million people who have the more advanced forms of macular degeneration. And we know very, very well in age-related macular degeneration what the risk factors are. And there's certain things you can't do anything about, like whether you're white or how old you are. There's certain things you can do stuff about, like smoking or being obese. But there's also a family history. You can't do things about it, but this is where some of this genetic stuff comes into play, like complement factor H, like Dr. Smith was talking about earlier. So here's a picture. I couldn't look at this picture and tell you if this person has age-related macular degeneration or if they have C3G. This happens to be a person with C3G. But if you looked at those cross sections, now you see some little bumps under the retina. Those are those little bumps under the rug that we talked about. And that's what drusen look like if you look at them in cross-section. And again, they look very, very similar in the two conditions. So now, again, drusen in both of these conditions, most people who have drusen alone, so 18 million people with age-related macular degeneration, and the people with C3G who develop these have normal vision, or they have minimally blurred vision. There are some changes, though, that you see when this stuff kind of forms under the retina. One is that people will oftentimes say they don't adapt quite as quickly from light to dark. So they'll be in a bright room, and they'll go into a dark room, and it takes, every one of us, it takes a little time to adapt. It seems it takes a little longer in a lot of people who have drusen in the eyes. There's a reduced contrast, and contrast is a weird concept, but this is a bright contrast eye chart. It's got black letters on a white background. There's a lot of difference between the two. But if you make the black less black and the white less white, things kind of get a little faded. And for the older people in the room, when you had those TVs where you could turn down the contrast on it, this is kind of how things look. They can kind of fade out. You can compensate for this a lot of times in brighter light. But over the years, people with drusen will say, things are not just quite as punchy as what they used to be. So these little drusen spots, if you look at them over time, they can kind of come and go, but they tend to develop more over time in both of these conditions. And we know there's certain risk factors in age-related macular degeneration as far as the size and the location of these, as far as what's your risk to go on to develop vision loss. We don't have enough people with C3G to stratify things into risk categories like that. But a difference, most of the things are kind of similar between these two conditions. But for C3G, the drusen tend to start at an earlier age. There's a Mayo Clinic study that says they usually start about 20 years after diagnosis. Uh, I've seen people with them a little earlier than that, but generally C3G, the drusen will be seen kind of starting in the 20s or 40s, whereas in age-related macular degeneration, it's 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. So, much later age groups. So this is a picture of some of these drusen just in some different people with C3G. So here's a person that has lots of drusen in the periphery outside of the macula and a little bit kind of encroaching towards the macula. If you looked at these ones on the side, this is just a pretty view of those bumps under the rug. This person has some drusen in the center. This person just has some little drusen over to the side. So these are all different phenotypes of how people can look. And you couldn't really tell, again, age-related macular degeneration from C3G disease. So in both of these conditions, as I said, most people that develop these hang out in this drusen-only phase, which is minimal loss of vision. Okay, and people do pretty well. But there is a subset, it's less than 1 in 5 people, but that are going to progress on to one of these more advanced forms. And we're going to call these the wet form and geographic atrophy, and we'll go into that a little bit more. But again, that's where most of the vision loss is for this. We know these numbers super, super well for age-related macular degeneration, but these percentages are less well worked out for C3G because we don't have as many people. The majority of people that do get into trouble, though, have what we call the wet form of macular degeneration. And if this is related to complement factor H, okay, again, a little bit as Dr. Smith was talking about, in the kidney. And what you tend to see in this is a growth of abnormal blood vessels from underneath the retina that grow into a lump. They can break and bleed, and they can leave a big old scar in the macula, a big area that's dead and doesn't see. So people tend to have peripheral vision, but their center vision can be fairly well affected for it. Now, what are the early symptoms of this? Again, most people start with drusen of just nothing. But if you're going to start to develop a little area of bad blood vessels, most people will have a relatively rapid onset of some change in their vision. And oftentimes that will be a little gray spot. It may be an area of warping or kind of distortion of vision. So this is just a piece of graph paper. And if you're looking at the middle, somebody developing abnormal blood vessels might say, hey, I'm starting to see this that I didn't see before. Something is looking warped or weird. It would be somewhere close to the center of your vision. So like if you were looking at somebody's face from 6 feet away, it would be like if you're looking at their nose, it might be a blurry area covering their eye or covering part of their mouth or something. But it would be in here. It wouldn't be way out there that you would be noticing things. It could be a faded spot, but a lot of times it's warped. Some people will notice an area that's color desaturated, kind of like a black and white vision that's there. This is called an Amsler grid, and we oftentimes give these to people who are at a little bit higher risk, and you can have them look at that dot, and they'll see something, usually if you see a change. But a lot of times people actually pick things up in the real world before they even pick them up on that piece of graph paper. Without treatment, if you just let these bad blood vessels grow, they tend to get bigger and do a lot of damage to the center of the vision. So we try to identify people who have these early. So this is kind of a real life mock-up of what you would see if you would have some area of distortion or metamorphopsia. You might be looking over here, but see part of your visual field is warped, is really kind of weird for things. If it happened to happen right in the center as it started, you might see something like this. And you'd say, oh, that's okay because it's pretty good over here. I would just look around it. But wherever you look, that blurry spot goes with you. So you can't really look around the darn spot. So this is just an example of, one of, again, drusen under the retina. And these are kind of weak areas under the retina. And sometimes some abnormal blood vessels can grow from the normal blood vessels under the retina, can grow up into this area and form this bump and then break and bleed. And this is just the OCT equivalent of somebody starting to form choroidal neovascularization or these bad blood vessels. So now another form that's not worked out as well for C3G, but is this thing called geographic atrophy. And in this condition, instead of developing bad blood vessels, you'll have little areas oftentimes where the drusen are, where the retina will start to wither away. And these little withered areas, your brain compensates for them. you tend not to see them. And so early on, there's no changes from them, but they can progress over years. This is a little area where the drusen faded and there's a little withering that's there. Oftentimes, if you get enough of this withering, people can start to have trouble reading big words. And I'll kind of show you why in just a second. But this is a person, again, who has developed some withering. And I've got outlined these areas where the withering is. The things are a little bit lighter. They can be kind of hard to see sometimes. So this is something that your eye doctors would see, but you probably would not see early on. This is a person, just an example of somebody of having a little area of withering that 2 years later is bigger. Now there's two. Now it's kind of surrounding the middle. There's a little island of good vision in the center. So this person's still 20/20, but they right around the middle, they're not seeing too well. So what happens with that? Well, you start reading and you don't see big words anymore because there's that big word complement, and you can see the middle of the word, but the beginning and the end of the word fall into those blind spots that you have. So you end up starting to have to read in little stretches, and people's reading speed really slows down. So we know these withered areas, what part of what's at least is going on is an overactive complement system is causing things to wither underneath the retina with this. This happens in macular degeneration. We think it happens as well with C3G with this, but again, not as well worked out for things. But defects, especially complement factor H and in the 3C genes, are risk factors to develop these withered areas. Now, again, macular degeneration, lots and lots of people, millions of people with this. 80% of what a normal retina specialist will see will be people with macular degeneration or diabetes. So super common stuff. And we know that what we do for people when they start to develop a moderate number of these drusen is we say, hey, you should come in and have your eye exams to watch for precursors of bad blood vessels forming. We know that there's a lot of oxidative damage that goes on underneath the retina. And so certain antioxidant vitamins you can take, and that will reduce a little bit of the chance for developing that damage. Getting exercise, getting your cholesterol down, quitting smoking are all things that can help people with macular degeneration. C3G, we don't really know as well what things can help, but a lot of people will recommend some of the same things for them. But whether you should take these vitamins that we take for macular degeneration, nobody's proven that is helpful. To prove it in macular degeneration, it took a study of 5,000 people for 10 years. Not going to happen with C3G ever, okay, for things. So we don't know. Some doctors will recommend it. It's probably not harmful. Whether it's helpful or not is certainly questionable, though. But even in that range, most people, if you don't treat, most people with drusen don't progress on to the problems. But there's going to be that subset, less than 1 in 5 that does. And a lot of them are going to go on to this wet macular degeneration, these growth of these bad blood vessels. The standard of care for the last 18 years for taking care of those people has been to give them a shot in the eye of medicines that block a growth factor that causes blood vessels to grow. It's called vascular endothelial growth factor. And they make several different medicines for this. It's pretty effective in macular degeneration. In 90% of people, it will get control of those blood vessels. So when I started this gig for macular degeneration that went wet, 90% of people within a year, their vision dropped to big E kind of vision, okay? Now, 90% of people keep 20/40 or better vision, okay? So an amazing sea change. We know it works for people with C3G, but we don't have as good of percentages. Best guess is it's probably just about as effective, though, probably about 90%. These areas of geographic atrophy in people with macular degeneration, it's cool. We know that C3 plays a role in this. What we had approved in 2023 was injections of different complement inhibitors inside of the eye that can slow that withering process. And is that helpful in people with C3G and this atrophy? Well, number one, there's very few people with this. It's not FDA approved, and there's not even a case report, not even a single case report out yet, in looking at that. So we really don't know the answer to that one. But there aren't that many people who have it. Now this like grosses people out to heck, but shot in the eye, for things of this medicine. And you just go, oh my gosh, worst thing in the world, to get a shot in the eye. You can numb an eye up, clean an eye up. I've literally had people who I've given this to, and they've fallen asleep before the procedure, and I've had to wake them up afterwards. They didn't even know that they got the shot, for things. You sneak the needle in from the side, you don't see it. It's not going, ooh, scaring the heck out of you for things. But the medicine, it goes inside of the eye, and I think this is not the greatest picture. It's a needle thinner than a TB syringe needle that you give this with, that you give like a TB test. It's a drop of medicine that goes in. That medicine can get from the fluid in the eye to the back of the eye and control these bad blood vessels. But it has to be given depending on the person, kind of usually every 4 to 12 weeks, and usually has to be, something that's chronically given. So it works, but the biggest thing is catching things early, for those people who need it. So what if you got C3G, you're diagnosed, what should you do as far as eyes? Well, first thing you do is just get an eye exam, hopefully by somebody who has some vague familiarity with C3G. If they tell you, oh, well, you're 20 years old and it's odd, you have macular degeneration, drusen. Well, you probably don't. You probably have C3G, drusen. But most of the time early on, you've got nothing. If you've got nothing, you probably should every couple of years have your eyes looked at. If somebody looks at you and you do have drusen, you probably should have exams about every year and monitor your center vision for things like the things that we just talked about. And using one of these pieces of graph paper, an Amsler grid is something that a lot of people are going to give you. If you start to develop any of these findings that we talked about, the new area of warping of vision for things, a fixed blurry spot in the vision, decreased vision, kind of suddenly in one eye, those are going to be the things that should trigger you to call up your eye doctor and get in within a day or two and have somebody look. Because if you catch these bad blood vessels early, you can do pretty well. What to do about these vitamin supplements? You probably want to talk with people. Most people don't really prescribe them, but who knows? Maybe we'll end up getting a study that indicates some benefit. I doubt we'll ever have enough data to be able to prove that. There's some cool unanswered questions. The stuff that's being presented here, these new medicines, can you take those systemically, and will they reduce the chance of you having your eye problems? Very cool. We don't know yet, but that's really exciting that it could be. These complement inhibitors, if you're having this atrophy in the eye, can you inject it in C3G? Could it be of help? Maybe yes. It's not FDA approved for that. And we do know there's some potential bad side effects from things. And so it's not something you just want to go out for and do willy-nilly. So in summary, complement definitely plays a role in drusen, both in people with age-related macular degeneration and in C3G. Drusen will form in most people with C3G over time, and most people are going to keep pretty good vision. But there are a group of people who are going to progress on to things that are vision threatening. If we can detect those people when they're developing these problems early, we can oftentimes treat and preserve vision, though. So that's a great thing. So I want to thank you all for letting me talk. This is a picture. I was with Richard and Lynn in March, and this wasn't pegged, for things. I mislabeled that as far as approval. But when we were there in March, you can see it was a little cool. But Richard wearing his classic beret here, and Lynn celebrating and really celebrating for all the work that they've done, but they were also happy really for you guys all. So Richard and Lynn, thank you very much.